Welcome, all you friends, neighbors, family, comrades, brothers, and sisters. Welcome from Chicago, where we bring you another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. This time we bring you number 77 for the week of November 13th. It's the 77 is the number of times we've recorded this from home, hence we call it Heartland from home. And today we have a couple of friends from Uptown, Michael Rohrbach and Helen Schiller, talking about Voice of the People. And we welcome from CD Records and Recordings the CEO, James Ginsberg. Hi, Katy. How are you doing today?
I'm okay, Michael. How about yourself?
I'm good, thanks.
You got anything fun, good news from this
Well,
week?
I had a good week. Last Sunday was warm, 65 degrees out on my front porch. I opened up my Prairie Dancer front porch studio gallery, met a lot of interesting people, friends came around, people from the neighborhood. I sold some photographs, I sold some books. It was really nice, and I wish there was going to be more warm weather. And then on Thursday, I had my last class, in-session class at DePaul, where I teach, along with Ewan Haig, a class called Activists and Activism since 1960. I love my students. I love their kind of concern and interest about things in the world. And I look forward to knowing a number of them going forward, helping to change the world. How about you?
Well, I'm glad for you and your class, and I like talking to them when you let me.
You were good in my class, you and Mary Wozniak.
Yeah, we like doing it. For me this week, taking a walk with my sister was a highlight, and returning to work for the Christmas tree season at Gethsemane was also a highlight. So let's now to the bad news. Globally, there's a pretty terrible situation in Belarus, as everyone knows. We're concerned about those poor people who are being used as pawns by some really bad dudes in Belarus. And there seemed to be no shortage of bad dudes on the Polish side of the border, because their reaction to those poor people who are being used as pawns is not okay either. So, yeah. And, reading about Daniel Ortega being reelected thanks to jailing his most or all of his electoral opponents is quite a lesson to those of us who have followed politics and have been political our entire lives. Stuff can happen.
Yeah, it does. I went to Nicaragua 3 times. And in those days, we were pretty supportive of Ortega and the Sandinistas.
I know.
And he had to make a lot of deals, and he's really spun himself downhill in a negative way.
Yeah. I thought you weren't going to say anything about Daniel Ortega.
Well, I actually think we need to say something, and I'm in touch with some people in Nicaragua to try to get a closer view. But it doesn't appear to be very good at all.
No. Another not good thing, the trial of the young man in Kenosha, Wisconsin continues, young Kyle Rittenhouse. And I believe if you watch it closely, you will hear what passes for an excuse to carry deadly weapons in a protest situation, and it simply does not wash. This kid was 17. The gun was bought for him by an 18-year-old. He was driven to Kenosha by his mother. Gun violence in America is an example set, aided, and abetted by adults, but carried out by children now. Tell me, how are we different from the situation in countries wherein child soldiers are groomed by adults too addled to know right from wrong? We're in a really bad spot here, and I really hope that trial takes the opportunity, as so far the judge has indicated a bit of a inclination to teach or preach from the bench. We'll see.
Yeah, guns are a real problem, and it's, there's all kinds of court cases going on and decisions being made about where you can carry guns, where you can't, if they're registered, if they're not. There's not a lot good about guns.
Right. Let's.
I'd like to call people's attention to here in Illinois, the ongoing struggle between saving nature and the so-called expansion of civilization. Up in Rockford, there is a little chunk of prairie at the Rockford Airport Authority called the Bell Bowl Prairie. And the airport wants to expand their operations, mainly for cargo, and they want to, basically bulldoze the prairie. There's a group up there that got a reprieve from a judge, so that right now that is halted. We'll see what happens with that. Obviously there are real needs to expand the business operations, but we have to make some sacrifices on that when it comes to basically preserving the earth itself.
It's a good news story that they've temporarily paused construction. It's very hard to get that kind of attention, and yet it's absolutely what's needed. So,
and speaking of climate and nature, what's going on in Glasgow?
Well, it's the conferences as we speak, as this show comes on the air, is over. But the U.S. envoy on climate change, John Kerry, announced U.S.-China cooperation this week, an agreement to work together on climate change solutions, which was really a good news piece for us all, given the kinds of things that were being said, last week when leaders were basically either not showing up to the conference or leaving before the real work started. So that's a good news thing, and I don't want to be cynical about it. I want to be hopeful. As far as COVID goes, we have had an uptick, and CPS gave school off yesterday for kids to get the vaccine, the first blush of that activity. Germany is experiencing their fourth surge, and we generally follow Europe, as Robin Gable said last week. So, keep wearing masks, people, and get the blinking shots. All right.
We want to thank you for listening to the Live from the Heartland show here on WLUW 88.7. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back with our guests talking about Voice of the People in Chicago's wonderful uptown.
There's a Starbucks on every corner, every restaurant's dead at night. But when the hood goes up, so does the rent, and I can't pay my price. I gotta move out to the suburbs, 'cause the low end got too high. I can't live where I grew up, y'all. I gotta kiss my hood goodbye. They build high-end houses down where the projects used to be. They even got $1 million condos in Cabrini Green. I gotta move out to the suburbs, 'cause the low end got too high. I can't live where I grew up, y'all. I gotta kiss my crib goodbye. Now they pushing out the poor folks and making lakefront look new. They got restaurants and skateboard parks and yard clubs too. I gotta move out to the suburbs, 'cause the low end got too high. I can't live where I grew up, y'all. I gotta kiss my hood goodbye. Yay! kiss my hood goodbye.
What a great song. I love that song. Plus, Voice you have a whole list I found out on your website of good organizing songs around what you do. Very cool. What do you call it? The blues list or something?
It's our blues playlist, and it's all home oriented or rental or people getting locked out of their apartments and all kinds of home related blues music, which is just plain fun. So yeah,
very
people
cool.
could go to our YouTube channel for that if they wanted to check it out.
So my
landlord rang my front door bell. I went anyhow. There's a song about stuff like that. Good one.
Yep.
Okay. So we invited Michael and Helen this week because Voice of the People in Uptown is celebrating 50 years of doing the hard work of saving, creating, and managing affordable housing in Uptown and beyond. How about if you tell us first about the event you're calling Sweet Home Uptown 2021, occurring next Thursday, November 18th. And and the honorees.
Well, thank you, and for the chance to talk to you. This will be our second fundraiser of this type, where the first one actually was the 50th anniversary, and now we're really going a little over that. But it was right in the middle of COVID, so it wound up being a virtual event. We had to sort of produce it as a TV show with interactivity with people, and it turned out last year would be a blast. We had over 200 people there. And then like 3,000 folks watched it on YouTube afterwards, where essentially, we're a affordable housing group in Uptown and have been a center of change and redevelopment and battles about preserving affordable housing and so forth for so long, but have never really taken the time to celebrate our history or really reflect on that in terms of how do we look forward and have programming and proactive plans in the future so that we can still have a sustainably diverse community. And so this Thursday night, 6:30, that's essentially the theme, both reflecting on history, honoring people that were kind of a part of that or symbolic of change in Chicago, and moving forward in some creative ways.
Can one of you talk a little bit about Uptown's long history of organizing around housing? I know going back in my own life, we had I think the first contract between tenants and landlords, and we had a rent strike at the Sampson building on the 4400 block of Kenmore. And later we took on the Marymount building over on Broadway. That was way back way back long ago. What's been going on since then around organizing around housing that both of you could share some reporting on?
So you mentioned the Marymount building, which has its own place in history. The Marymount building there were three courtways, for people who don't know, three courtways on Broadway, and that was affordable housing that was owned and managed by the Marymount Foundation. And then sometime in the early mid 70s, Marymount backed off, and it ended up in the buildings ended up in the HUD inventory, and a developer who was the son-in-law of then Mayor Richard J. Daley got access and purchased it and made it part of an overall development plan that he was proposing that basically was going to tear down, and did ultimately, everything in Uptown that was between Pensacola and Montrose, Sheridan and Broadway, where they come together, and Hazel. So it was a huge block, and it contained the Urban Progress Center. It contained multiple housing opportunity, housing for people. It contained tens of several hundred units. It contained a lot of cultural activities, recreational activities, including a huge bowling alley. At any rate, the tenants in in the Marymount buildings came together, and on their behalf, we filed a lawsuit that became known as the Avery lawsuit. And it charged that the city was engaged in a conspiracy to destroy an economically and racially integrated community. A federal judge accepted as a cause of action, the racial complaint, but dismissed the economic complaint, since there is nothing in our Constitution that protects economic rights, and which I think is important for us to know. And that lawsuit proceeded for many years. We settled with the developer at the end of the 70s. He built not what his original concept was, which was Twin Towers and exclusive retail. But as a result of our negotiations and lawsuit, we got a supermarket, which is the jewel that's there, and housing that's above it, 20% of which was Section 8, and the courtways were to be 20% Section 8. He ultimately turned them into 100% Section 8 dedicated to seniors, because that was actually economically beneficial for him. And he ultimately sold the Pensacola building that was called the Pensacola Place, that was over the Jewel, for multiple millions of dollars, which I believe is now part of the case against his son, who's the alderman of the 11th Ward. At any rate, that was known as our lawsuit was known as the Avery lawsuit, and it was the basis upon which we negotiated for many years, including after I became alderman, for additional housing in Uptown. And the further connection to voice on this is that after Harold was elected, we were making great strides in a settlement with HUD and with the city, and we're very literally a council meeting away from finalizing that settlement, which would have created several hundred units of owner-occupied 3 flats that would be targeted to young people living in the community, or people who are like teaching and doing other stuff like that, with an agreement to rent the additional 2 apartments at a moderate rate, a la based on what HUD did with their HUD mortgage buildings, where they regulated moderate priced rents. And we lost that battle after Harold died. The city council, new majority, killed it. And we proceeded to struggle around getting a settlement, which ultimately happened around 1989. And that was to fund a building that COSA, which was a development group started by Access Living, to create housing that was for both able and disabled people. And that was a building that is now part of the, long story short, is now part of the Voice inventory.
Okay, let me ask a question. Let me ask a question so that we get Michael in there too. You folks, what you just described, Helen, an incredible history that you've put together in Uptown, uniquely, I'd say, in Uptown. And Uptown was already unique as a port of entry for many, many years. And that's part of why, really, by the time we were all coming into our own as organizers, we could have a voice in Uptown, literally, because it was made up of so many different people, and it was such a diverse, both racially and economically, population. Talk a little bit about the long view, Michael, if you can, on Uptown managing to thwart, to the extent that you all have, to the extent that Helen just spoke to, wholesale urban removal, the likes of which happened further south of us all, in Lincoln Park and Lakeview and the near north. Maybe talk about the extent to which it has been thwarted. And
well, I think kind of Helen cited an example in some detail, which is a pattern of sorts where obviously there was battles against plans for wholesale demolition of housing or loss of housing that was sort of engineered in sort of racist and classist ways, like through arson for profit, right, and things like that. You might remember going way back, and then there'd be the community coming together, trying to develop affirmative plans for how do we redress these things and try to keep a balance in the community with affordable housing. And sometimes those things were successful and sometimes they weren't, but there are actually a number of buildings that are affordable housing in Uptown, and which is a pretty dense community compared to other other parts of the north side, for example.
Right.
And we're lucky to have as much affordable housing as we have, but we've also lost a lot through gentrification and reinvestment. So
Mhm.
it's almost in that kind of challenging context that we need to figure out, well, what is the most productive way to move forward into the future, and utilizing some of the experience of Helen and so many other people that have been here.
Let me ask a follow-up question about that. In my days of living in Uptown, which kind of ended in 1969, it was between Montrose and Wilson, Broadway going west, it kind of got all knocked down, and they built Truman College. Looking back on that, was that a good thing to do? I mean, Truman College serves a lot of people. We lost a lot of housing. Any take on that contradiction?
There was never any doubt, I don't think, that people welcomed the notion of having a city college in Uptown. The question is where it was going to be put. And the cynicism of saying it was for people for whom they were removing the housing in order to build it is what people objected to and wanted to highlight. So that was really the struggle. And the Voice, as a mass organization before it became a housing organization, the housing organization grew out of that, was largely engaged in welfare defense and fighting this urban removal project. And therefore really engaged in a battle with the Model Cities Council. That really was made up of people who had no interest in keeping the folks who were currently at the time living in Uptown, letting them stay there and be able to benefit from the improvements that they were projecting to make.
We had kind of an interesting confluence of these different people's histories recently, because we hosted a blues concert at the Sunnyside Mall just south of Truman College a few weeks back. And it was part of this lead up to our Sweet Home Uptown fundraiser and celebration on Thursday night. But, you know, those in attendance was both low income tenants that were from our buildings, close by, but also a lot of homeowners and condo owners who had been there the last 20 years and didn't really understand all this context of history and strife, and people who actually died in buildings that were intended to be burned down to make way for Truman College or grandiose profit-making schemes. And so it was a fascinating bringing together of people around hearing that history and also trying to come together and say, hey, we want to do what we can going forward to preserve every bit of affordable housing that we can in Uptown, because this is a very valuable resource. And in fact, in some communities and in our community, affordable housing really represents the diversity that's in the community now.
Yeah, can I just ask you to talk about a little bit so that we don't forget before we run out of time, Thursday, November 18th, and the honorees that you're having, that you're honoring on this event?
I'd be happy to. One of them is Marlene Barton, who is a resident of one of our buildings, but she goes back even before then, with her extended family being one of the first Black families to move on the 4200 block of Kenmore, not too far from away from what Michael was talking about earlier. And she was a bit of a pioneer, working in schools, working with youth, trying to mitigate the tensions between youth and police over time, helping with all kinds of survival programs around food and shelter, and then literally has been on Voice's board since 1999. So really one of those people who doesn't take the credit for organizing, but has always been there on every social justice campaign, and that's Marlene Barton. Another gentleman, Tom Lenz, was executive director for 8 years during the Harold Washington years and so forth in the 1980s. He built a very strong staff, people who went on to all kinds of incredible other work in other places as well. And we're honoring his work. And he was really ED during a time when some of the buildings were being developed to really kind of recover from those losses from Truman College development of the previous decade. And it really laid the groundwork in the future, not just for Voice having a portfolio of buildings, But we even spun off SRO work with Lakefront SRO, which saved about 10 or 15 buildings on the north side. And that was done from our leadership and really like kamikaze work going in and taking over management of some of these SRO buildings so that they could then be turned over for responsible development. So Boyce was very active during his time as the ED, and we're honoring him. And another guy, Calvin Holmes, who heads up this group called the Chicago Community Loan Fund. And sometimes we read about alternative lenders like in third world countries who do experimental stuff, or they support co-ops and worker enterprises and all that kind of thing. Well, Chicago Community Loan Fund has been doing this for years and taken on a lot of risky projects that most bigger banks will not. And so we're honoring him, and all of everybody's legacy here is sort of focusing on in a direction to where we need to utilize this experience to figure out how to carve out a place for people of all incomes in Uptown and really the North Side in general. We got to have a better sense of strategy about how to improve and have stable housing going into the future.
Who's that fellow just came in?
Just somebody that's going to be on next. Sorry.
Oh, good. Okay, well, hey, y'all mentioned Sunnyside Mall. I just want to get in before it's too late that I got to live at the corner of Sunnyside and Magnolia about the same time I was learning to love country music. And Sunnyside and Magnolia it was some great years over there. Let me ask you both, one of you at least share a little information on what is a diversity land trust and how is it developing in Uptown?
Well, I'll just say briefly, Michael, that we're exploring with experts around town about this idea of setting up a community land trust, which under normal circumstances is done for residential ownership, where you have a nonprofit entity that owns land. People sort of buy their home or condo from it. But when they want to sell, they have to sell it at a limited price, so it's still available to people of moderate income. Well, these kind of community land trusts aren't done so much with multi-unit buildings, and especially ones serving the lowest income. And we're trying to innovate a model where we can have buildings that are multi-unit, low income, and the unifying feature is that they commit to permanent affordability. And then with that, get property tax benefits, get service benefits, get access to grants and things that help to make them viable, not just for the time of a mortgage, but forever. And then if you've got a good organization like that, then you can have other affordable housing sponsors join in with it and collectively preserve more housing and not just pit one affordable housing provider against another for scarce resources in a place like Uptown and the entire North Side. So we're trying to explore this, raise a little awareness about this possibility, and try to be proactive on something we don't do in the United States, actually, which is long-term planning, right? I mean, you'd have to go to Europe or Canada to have housing that you always know is going to be there, always going to be funded well, and it's always going to be affordable, right? So, but we also know that a healthy community is also an economically diverse community too. So we have to end because we've gone up to our 20 minutes.
It's good hearing you talk though, Mike.
And we have at least 2 or 3 other questions we didn't get to, stuff around up here in Rogers Park. We really look to you as models because we're worried about gentrification too. We also now have a new homeless community camped out at the city park that we wanted to ask you a lot of this. So we're going to have you back. Can you repeat how people can support Voice of the People next week?
Yeah, all you do, just Google Give Lively Sweet Home Uptown, and you'll go straight to our event page. You can learn all about us. You could actually attend for free or donate, either one.
Sweet Home Uptown, that's like another line to the song, Sunnyside and Magnolia.
Well, there you go. Yeah, it's our blues theme. You can go check it out.
Well, we want to thank both Helen Schiller and Michael Rohrbach for coming on live from the Heartland today and for, really filling our little 20-minute slot.
let me just say that Helen has a new book coming out, so she'll definitely be back on. in the new
Yeah.
year.
We're gonna have to have her back right before the book comes out. When is it? January, Helen?
No, sometime next year, not January. It'll be
Oh.
later in the year. I don't have
Alright.
it yet.
Well, we'll get you back for that. Thank you both for your excellent work over all the years. Appreciate it
Thank you.
You
very
guys.
much.
Adios.
Adios.
Bye.
Thank you.
Because my mouth is wide with laughter and my throat is deep with song. You do not think I suffer after I have held my pain so long. Because my mouth is wide with laughter, you do not hear my inner cry. Because my feet are gay with dancing, you do not know. I die. You do not know. I die.
Welcome back. James, we saw you for a minute in our previous conversation, but we're so pleased and honored really to welcome James Ginsberg, the CEO of CD Records. In preparation for this interview, James, I was introduced to you, your label, the music, and the incredible quiet dignity of your mission. I've got to say, I'm so impressed by everything that we've researched this past week, thanks to Lynn Orman turning us on to you. And so welcome to Live from the Heartland, also known as Heartland at Home during the pandemic. And you can hear us.
Yep. Thanks, Katie. It's a real pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. So I admit, while I listened to and did learn to play classical music on the piano in my youth, we do not often cover it here on the Heartland. And so excuse our inexperience with the genre, but
First time.
No
but
worries.
we are very happy to introduce our listeners to your great catalog of diverse offerings and beautiful artists. So impressive. How did you come to the vocation of recording music, for starters, particularly classic and particularly by and with musicians of diverse backgrounds?
I'll try to make the short version of this story. I've always been a music lover. I reviewed recordings for American Record Guide for a number of years. I actually used to run the classical format at the WHPK, the campus radio at the University of Chicago. I had done some work in music PR. I worked for None Such Records for a summer and did projects for them after that. So I had a lot of background in the music and recording business when I noticed all these wonderful Chicago artists who I would hear in concerts and live performances over the WFMT radio station. And then I would go to record stores back when we had record stores like Rose Records and look for their recordings, and there were none to be found. And this was very odd to me as someone who had grown up in New York, because New York is home to most of the major record conglomerates, New York or the West Coast. And so artists who perform in New York, you go to a record store and there are lots of recordings. But the artists here in Chicago, except for the Chicago Symphony itself, really were not being recorded by anybody. So I thought, well, somebody should do something about that. So using my background and also a wonderful recording engineer I knew, Bill Malone, who also went to the University of Chicago and was on WHPK with me, I floated the idea of starting a label to record and promote, get the word out there about these wonderful Chicago artists that people outside Chicago just weren't getting that opportunity to hear.
Excellent. That's really excellent. Sadie has a number of artists up for Grammy nomination consideration. I was going to ask that question after we played your music. So, Michael, did you want to ask something first or no?
Well, I just, one of the things I have in my notes is this event, Emerging Artist Competition. And I think you're involved with that, and how do folks take part in it?
Right, so you're referring to this, whoops, that's upside down, isn't it? You're referring to this, our Emerging Artists Competition, which is happening next weekend. Saturday is the semifinals, Sunday is the finals, which will be live and open to the public. Everything will be live streamed on our website, cedillerecords.org. That's CEDILLE records.org. And this was actually an initiative from our 30th anniversary a couple of years ago, but unfortunately, we had planned we had picked the semifinalists and planned the live rounds for May 2020, and obviously the world changed. And we did not get to have our live rounds in May 2020, but we're finally having them, like I said, the following weekend, next weekend, at the Spertus Institute, 610 South Michigan. First round, the semis are live streamed only. The finals are open to the public as well as being live streamed. Those start at 1:00 on next Sunday, and I encourage people to come. We've got 6 semifinalists. These really represent the future of classical music in Chicago, and the prize for the winning performer is to make their debut recording on Sadie Records. And one of the things we're highlighting here and that we're so proud of is that there are over 80 different musical artists, performers, ensembles, etc., who actually made their recording debuts with the label. Some pretty big names too, like Eighth Blackbird, the contemporary sextet that won 4 Grammys for us since then. Pacifica Quartet, which has won 2 Grammys and has been recording with us for 20 years now. So many soloists as well. So we really wanted to take that aspect to the next generation and really help discover the next generation of great young musicians in Chicago.
Your podcasts are really special.
Thank
I
you.
listened to a number of them this week, and not only do you have a great voice for radio,
Ace
Well,
for it
you-
too.
yes, you have, we all do, don't we? And I always joke I have a good wardrobe for radio as well. But how has that specific technology helped spread Sadie music and your exposure to a wider audience with the podcasts?
Well, with the change to music consumption online and mostly digitally, although the sales of physical CDs has sort of plateaued now. It's not dropping so much anymore, but the great bulk of the revenues and listens are through streaming or online, which means your way of promoting has to be online as well. So we're very active on social media. And also we created this podcast series some years ago now, Classical Chicago Podcast, where I interview artists involved in a new release that's coming out on Sadie Records and give them a chance to talk about the music and really try to go beyond what's in the booklet and the liner notes and really go into their experience of the recording sessions, why the repertoire is so special to them, if it's an ensemble, how they work together, what's different about recording versus live performance, what makes Chicago, because these are all, of course, all Chicago artists, or almost all, such a special place, topics like that.
Yeah. It's very impressive. Your entire catalog and the quality of your recording. Can you give us a little intro into the piece that we're going to play now, the Two Black Churches, Movement 1?
And of
We're
course,
just
the
playing
intro.
the ballad. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the intro to this show also came from this album. So this is an album, I'm going to put it up here, Dreams of a New Day, starring Will Liverman. Wonderful baritone, came through the Ryan Opera Center here at Lyric Opera of Chicago. Actually was the youngest person ever admitted to that program. And this really was a pandemic project. It was
James, hold that up one more time.
sure. It was actually recorded in the summer of last year. Had to travel to Indiana to do it because of COVID restrictions here, actually, and came out February of this year, which of course is Black History Month, and it's all Black composers. The title is Dreams of a New Day, songs by Black composers. The intro to this interview was a song by the Chicago composer Margaret Bonds from the mid 20th century, from her set of 3 dream portraits, which are settings of Langston Hughes poems, and the one you heard was called Minstrel Man, and I think really sums up the Black American experience so well. And what you're about to hear was a piece that was newly commissioned for this project by Shauna Pebolo, a wonderful composer based at Wheaton College. And the piece you're going to hear an excerpt of is called Ballad of Birmingham. It's based on a poem about the 1963 Birmingham church bombing. We also wrote a second piece based on commissioned poetry about the 2015 Charleston church shooting, which is why it's called Two Black Churches, the 2-song set. But this is a segment from the Ballad of Birmingham, and it's a very poignant one. And the musical setting is just so gorgeous, where the daughter, one of the 4 girls who was murdered, says to her mom, "Hey, can I go to the protest marches?" And mother says, no, that's far too dangerous. Why don't you go to church and sing instead? And of course, we all know what happened.
Yeah. Well, let's listen up to the Ballad of Birmingham, Part 1, coming to you from CD Records.
Mother dear, she asks, may I go downtown instead of out to play and march the streets of Birmingham in a freedom march, freedom march today. No, baby, no, you may not go, for the dogs are fierce and wild, and clubs and hoses and guns and jails aren't good for a little child. But mother, I won't be alone. Other children will go with me and march the streets of Birmingham to make the country free.
Wow, that is a moving piece. And did you mention that was a live recording or no?
Well, so what you heard there was actually a live taped recording. That's why you have the visuals. But that piece was recorded in session for our album, just like the first piece you heard at the beginning of the program, which is actually the version from the album itself.
Yeah. Can we just mention that Sadie has a number of artists up for Grammy nomination consideration, including yourself for production, right?
Well, so the way this works
producer?
is we right now, members of the Recording Academy, or actually they just did finish voting, and the winner, the nominees will be announced on, I believe, the 22nd. So basically, we just try to get the word out to everybody who might be involved in the process of which albums we have that are up for consideration. Now, I can say that since 2003, we have won 7 Grammys and been nominated 21 times, including I received my first Grammy personally as a producer, actually this year, because of course the awards are in the early in the year following the voting. So at the 2021 awards, the Pacifica Quartet won for their album Contemporary Voices, which I produced. So that made me officially a Grammy winner. The previous year at the 2020 awards, I was a nominee for Producer of the Year Classical, although I did not win.
James, you also picked up an award this week from Lawyers for the Creative Arts. How about sharing a little bit with our listeners and our viewers about that?
Well, that's such a great service organization to artists, and they help with intellectual property issues, disputes, etc. But they were really pressed into service during the pandemic, helping artists deal with how do we get some of the money that's being made available to us. Right. How do we cut through some of this red tape, as well as their regular functions? So they just do such a marvelous job on behalf of artists, and I was so honored to receive their Distinguished Service to the Arts Award in 2020, but they didn't have an in-person event that year, so they asked me to come back with the award to be recognized in person. So I was very pleased to be able to do that and share the stage with Katy and Tim from the Hideout.
Excellent.
Yeah,
excellent.
Who they do such a great service. And actually, it's funny because they did a series on record labels, which was sponsored by the city as part of the Year of Chicago Music. And of course, I got to present Sadie Records at that, and actually brought along Black Oak Ensemble, a wonderful string trio we record that performed live. And then I was interviewed as well.
I can't tell you how much it means to us to have you here and to learn about Sadie. Thanks to our co-producer, Lynn Orman Weiss. But it's time for us now to acknowledge the elephant in the room, the fact that you are the son of one of our biggest sheroes going, and that is the indomitable Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Bless your heart and bless her. I'm sorry for your loss.
I appreciate that.
But Michael wanted to ask if he could talk about the quote that came in the piece you wrote. Michael, what was it? Most of the time, even when I go to sleep, what was that quote you had?
It's most of the time, even when I go to sleep, I'm thinking about legal problems. But when I go to the opera, I'm just lost in it. I'm loving it, and I don't think about any legal brief.
Yeah. Yes, that is a famous quote of Mother's, and I used it in a note I wrote for the Washington Opera, which had its season opening. They actually didn't open with an opera this year. They opened with a star-studded concert, and a portion of the concert was a tribute to my mother because she's such a great supporter, or was such a great supporter of the Washington National Opera. And they asked me to write a note for the program to talk about my mother's love of opera, and specifically of Washington National Opera. And I use that quote in there. And if I can do a shameless plug, we actually have a recording that ties the two together, my mother and her love of music. It's called Notorious RBG in Song. It features soprano and composer Patrice Michaels, who wrote full disclosure, she's my wife of 10 years now.
Hold it up there one more time, James. There we go. Yeah, excellent.
So she wrote a 9-song cycle called The Long View, a portrait of Ruth Bader Ginsburg in 9 songs, which actually the genesis for this was at my mother's 80th birthday. We asked 3 women composers to write songs, all based on texts about my mother. And Patrice wrote one song, which was a text from it was actually a 50th birthday tribute written by a typist at my father's law firm, who told a wonderful story about how she had basically just come off the boat from Spain, became a typist, and was handed all these legal writings from some quote lady lawyer, which my father was funneling to her, because back then when my mom taught at Rutgers, she didn't have any secretarial support. So this member of the typing pool at my father's firm was pressed into service and was reading stuff about gender-based discrimination. What is this? Anyway, it's a conversion story, and the punchline is RBG converted me through typing. So Patrice set this letter to music and then thought there's more in this, and came up with the song cycle. And then we came up with the album to include the song cycle and other songs that relate to my mother, including the other two that were commissioned for her 80th birthday, and an aria from the opera Scalia Ginsburg, a comic opera based on that famous relationship.
We only have, I think, a couple minutes left, or maybe a couple questions left. How about our valued local classical station, WFMT?
Yes.
How's it holding up in your estimation?
Oh, I mean, I think they're doing great.
Yeah.
They just had a fund drive, and I was very pleased that one of our recordings with the Pacifica Quartet and the star guitarist Sharon Isbin was one of their premiums that they use in the drive, and
Nice.
seem to be using a lot. So that's always nice when our albums are promoted that way. But FMT has been wonderful to CD over the years. In fact, at our gala every year, we have something called our Musical Partnership Award, where we give an award to an organization whose mission we feel dovetails well with our own of promoting Chicago musicians. And the choice for the first one was a no-brainer. It was WFMT because of their great service to the arts in Chicago.
I'd like to, 1 second, Michael. I want to make sure, Michael, that we tell James about the show that follows ours on WLUW, because when I was listening to your podcast, it reminded me of Bob Maravich, who runs help me out, Michael.
The gospel show, Gospel Memories.
Gospel Memories. Really an excellent show. He's been doing it for as long as we've been doing this one, and he's got a book out. He reminds me of you, is all I'm saying, and you might find him interesting. Go ahead, Michael James.
Well, on WFMT, I confess in my older age, I listen to it more than I used to. And but I also, in mixing up the rock and roll, etc., I put on WNUR Northwestern station now and then. They have a classical program on there. I don't know if you're aware of that, but I've heard some, people of color composers on there, them talking about it. And I have a daughter who came through the Chicago Music Institute, etc., used to play the violin a lot before she went off to college. So I always send stuff like that to her. I just wondered, do you think classical music is getting more popular and more play than it used to? What's the future of your industry, so to speak?
Well, I think because people have the ability to stream and listen online to whatever they want, they don't have to make that investment necessarily in a recording and try to find something in a record store, et cetera. I think that's lowered a lot of barriers to entry. And of course, playlists are such a big thing. And so people can discover music in so many more ways. So I think there's no doubt that there is more listening, to all genres. I think, it allows people to branch out whatever their favorite genre might have been. It makes it much easier to branch out to other genres than it used to be. And you definitely see younger audiences at some things, especially here in Chicago. I think the new music audience and conversely, the very early music audience, the period instrument audience, I think is definitely skews younger, which is really wonderful to see.
I would like for you to, first of all, to thank you for coming and with us this morning. Sorry for the little confusion there.
No
30th
worries.
apology there, Michael James.
The listeners and the viewers don't know about
No,
it.
I know.
Yeah.
Edit it out.
I would really very much like to tell people, Cedille is spelled CEDILLE, CedilleRecords.org, which is a
Right.
not-for-profit, which is also something I was going to ask you about. How does one do a not-for-profit record label? When Michael and I owned the Heartland, we realized after 30 years, we should have made it a not-for-profit. But how do you do that? And then I would like you to introduce the
Excellent.
music that we're going out with.
Wonderful. Well, so the classical music business has never, and record business, I should say, has never been a profit-making venture. There is the occasional success, like the Three Tenors, that the labels then try to chase that formula for the next 20 years unsuccessfully. From my Henry Fogel, who used to run the Chicago Symphony and is a charter board member of ours when we formed the board back in '94, likes to point out that, for example, Columbia Records, they would quote unquote balance the books of the classical division by declaring all the Broadway hits as classical music. So it was never a profit maker. It was always, quote, the prestige arm of the big conglomerates, often because the owners of like Sony and whatnot were great music lovers. So combine that with our focus on Chicago musicians who, at least when we start with them, are usually not that well known.
Mhm.
It was never going to be a profit-making business. There are labels that make a profit by basically having the artists pay everything. So in other words, artists who want to get their recordings out will pay a label to actually put out their music. Well, our formula is exactly the opposite. We actually cover all the costs and pay the artists for their work, which is the way it should be. But the only way to do that is to raise money from the public to support that mission. And our mission over the years has gravitated more and more towards not just recording, but promoting these artists and helping build careers. Hence our emerging artist competition. Here's a chance to hopefully build a career from very early on. So with that mission, we've been able to raise money for our work and branch out into all areas of the classical repertoire, including symphonies and operas and et cetera. And it's been very successful. And as for what we're going to end with, that's from a very recent album that came out this summer. It's called Leo Sowerby, the Paul Whiteman Commissions and Other Early Works. Sowerby is a composer whose name has kind of been forgotten to a certain extent outside of church circles. He's very well known in the choral and organ world, but not so much in the secular world. But in the 20s and 30s, he was the American composer most often programmed by American orchestras, essentially composer in residence to the Chicago Symphony. He won the Pulitzer Prize. He won the Prix de Rome. I mean, he was a big deal. But he didn't really take care of his secular works, didn't get them published properly. So they kind of fell by the wayside. And this is what's on this album is a perfect example. The headline works or works written for Paul Whiteman, who was a great band leader in the 20s and 30s, who ran these symphonic jazz concerts. Most notably, he was the one who commissioned Rhapsody in Blue for for his band's tour in 1924. Well, there were other composers on that tour, including Leo Sowerby. And Sowerby wrote a wonderful piece called Cinconata, which has never been heard of since. And then the next year, he actually wrote a second piece based on Sinclair Lewis's Babbitt, of all things, a symphony for jazz orchestra. But he wrote, this only exists in manuscript, and it was written so specifically for the Paul Whiteman Orchestra that most of the ledger lines don't have instruments. They have the names of players who switch instruments. So Mr. McCloskey could be playing clarinet or alto sax or trumpet. You have to, it's a nightmare for
Love it.
So anyway, as a result, these pieces have pretty much been forgotten, and we resurrected them with the wonderful band leader and trombonist Andy Baker, who know how to handle a score like that and hire theater musicians who could actually play this stuff. There are some other early works. These are all works Sowerby wrote when he was in his 20s on the album as well, involving the Avalon String Quartet. But what we're going to hear is a little segment of that piece I mentioned, Cinconata from 1924, the same year as Rhapsody in Blue. And if the tune sounds vaguely familiar, like if my friends could see me now from the Broadway hit Sweet Charity, keep in mind that Sowerby wrote this 40 years earlier.
Thank you so much, James Ginsberg of CD Records. Thank you. It's been a total joy to have you.
I look forward to meeting you in person and not
Same
too
here.
far off.
Thanks so much, Michael. Thanks so much, Katy.
Best of luck on
Good one.
everything. And let's go out to Cinconata.
pretty neat. I gotta tell you, I'm gonna listen to more classical music.
Yeah, I'm gonna buy some of those CDs. He was wonderful. He is wonderful. And
Yeah,
that
he's
whole
doing good
project
work.
is terrific. Okay, so we've used up our time today. For over 25 years, we've brought you live from the Heartland, now called Heartland at Home, broadcast every Saturday morning, 9 a.m. Central on Chicago's WLUW 88.7 FM, also streaming live from WLUW.org. We always have it archived on our channel at youtube.com/Heartland Media, and now Spotify and Google Podcasts. So just type in Live from the Heartland. Thanks to our Live from the Heartland team, Lynn Orman Weiss, and the great folks at WLUW, including former intern Gwen Brown. We ask you and plead with you to do good in the world.
The world needs all the good that we do.
All power to the people.
All power to the people. Over and out. See you next week. Thank you.